So, hi everyone. Sorry about getting started a bit late. I'm going to hand the mic to John, and we're beginning this series. I was speaking with John over the last couple of days because, as you're probably aware, that through Two Brothers we've been working together for quite some years. And I've been very privileged to travel with John up into Mossman area and through Daintree and over the mountain and into the western side, and where we went to the Laura Dance Festival a couple of years ago. And I was privileged, to spend some time with John's family and to hear some of the stories and some of the history there. And it is an untold history, and when people hear these stories, it really does make a difference. It changes our way of seeing what is happening in this country. So I'm going to pass it over to John now. I actually can't hear John myself, but I can see when he's speaking. And we're just going to fumble along a little bit today and just see what I can do during the week. So for our second one, to clear up some of these issues. So John, I'm just going to hand it over to you now. Thanks for coming on to our little program, and just ask you if you could tell us where you're from and where you're connected to country. And today's theme is going to be about starting with your grandmother's story. So can I just hand it over to you, John?
Okay, thank you, David, and Yalada to all. Ngayo bole garanja, ngayo bunday ganawara bubu. I'm sitting, I'm a Kuku Yalanji man speaking the language from that country, and I'm currently sitting in Ghana country, now referred to as Adelaide, South Australia. My name is John Hartley. I'm third son born to a Kuku Yalanji freshwater woman, Vera Myrtle Davis. My mother is the youngest daughter to Caroline and Edgar Davis, my grandparents. My father, of Irish descent, is Jack Hartley, a saltwater man. I'm going to try and just give some family background tonight and start it off so that I'm beginning from where it starts for me, I guess, and I'm trusting it may be of interest to the listeners. So, and firstly and respectfully, my mother's elder siblings are Lenny, twins Charlie and Myra, Arthur, Caroline, Gladdy, Les, Doug, Beryl, and of course my mother, Vera Myrtle Davis, nee Hartley. My mother is the only surviving member of our family line back to our grandfather and grandmother. My mother is now sitting here with me in Ghana country and is some 87 years young. I'm just going to go for it because I really can't hear anything, so I'm trusting everyone can hear. My mother's mother, my grandmother, Granny Kija Caroline Rose Davis, nee Molloy, and my mother said Granny often used the name Roberts as well. Granny was born in 1887 in a country around the Mt Molloy, Mount Carbine region of far north Queensland, which is, some 100k northwest of Cairns, in the western, or what we call the sunset Yalanji Bubu, or Bubu meaning country, and Bama meaning human being or person, just so that you know.
Yeah. Sorry.
My grandmother's mother is Kitty. Her father is Billy. Her brothers and sisters are Bertie, Borley, Jimmy Riley, Rosie Buchanan, Edward, and David Molloy. My mother's father, my grandfather, is George Edgar Davis, was born in 1883 in country around Laura region. His mother, my great-grandmother, Rosie Robinson, as Granddad referred to her last name, and my grandfather's father, a man of Irish descent, George Davis. His brothers were Joe, Freddie, and Arthur Brackenridge. You may recall a famous boxer back in the very early days of Georgie Brackenridge. Both my grandparents came from what we call today, generically, I guess, as the Kuku Yalanji Nation. Famous boxer back in the days. Now, if you, the Kuku Yalanji Nation homelands, in a very broad sense, run from the south of Mossman, far north Queensland, north to Cooktown, then inland west to Chillago, and back down to near Yarabah. It then swings back around over the range through areas of Gelatin and such, and reconnects back into an area just south of Mossman, or south of Port Douglas. For those that don't know, Mossman is approximately 70 k's along the eastern coastal side heading north from Cairns. The Kuku Yalanji Nation, again in broad brushstrokes, is divided or it's connected through two sides. One is the eastern side, or the coastal side, taking in all the rainforest areas around the Daintree and such. And we call that part of the country the eastern Yalanji, or the Sunrise Yalanji. If we head west over the range, we go through the rainforest and we hit into wooded country, savanna type Bubu, savanna type country, and we call that the Western Yalanji, or the Sunset Yalanji. Of course, there's a lot of clans within that area, and a lot of some dialectical changes in language. Both my grandparents were born in a time of what is referred to as the Palmer River Gold Rush. Like any gold rush in those early days, you had a horde of people converging into Kuku Yalanji country, particularly around the Palmer River regions. And it was an era of outright dispersal of Bama. Now, the usage of the word dispersal is really what I call a cover-up word for wholesale mass murder, because in fact that's what happened. And the quite large Kuku Yalanji nation was pretty much torn asunder and scattered. For those that survived, I mean, it's only really, a handful of families that survive the onslaught of the Palmer River Gold Rush and the outright dispersal of our fellow countrymen and women during that period. Now, outright dispersal was then given a coat of paint, and and then appeared in paper form by the way of the Aboriginal Protection and Restriction of the Sale of Opium Act. Now, which again is cover-up words for mass kidnapping and imprisonment and enslavement of Bama children. The Aboriginal Protection and Restriction of the Sale of Opium Act continued well into the 70s, and all of my family, as in fact all First Nations people throughout this continent, grew up under similar acts. But the point I'm making is that it continued into the 70s, and some would argue that it's not really finished at all, in that it is simply transformed into other forms of paper and certain acts and legislations. Now, under what we call the Act, it was introduced to control where and how Bama lived, where Bama worked, when Bama could do ceremony and cultural business, and who Bama could marry. Now, during this period, my grandmother was kidnapped from her family camp at the time at Mt Molloy, and was consequently interned at an Anglican mission run by Ernest Gribble at Yarabah. Yarabah is some 30, 40 odd k's south of Cairns. And as a guesstimate, I place her age from when she was kidnapped from kin and country to be in between maybe 4 and 8 years of age. Perhaps a couple of years older. I really can't be certain. What I do know is that my uncle Lenny, my mother's eldest brother, was born at Yarabah in 1910. So my granny was incarcerated for many years for no other reason than she was black. Well, in fact, it wasn't simply because of skin coloration. It was to erase memory and connection of kin and country. Something my grandmother never did, of course, nor did my grandfather. And that, through their lives, was a source of much hardship and struggle for them during those periods.
So, John, you've been talking about your grandmother. What about your grandfather? He's from a different area, I believe. Would you like to give us a little bit of that story?
Well, Granddad Edgar was from north of Mossman. They're both, as I said, they're both from the Kuku Yalanji nations, but in separate areas of Kuku Yalanji Bubu. And the earliest information I can find is my grandfather as being in Cooktown, and with his mother, my great-grandmother Rosie, and his 3 siblings, whom I mentioned before. And again, it was a period of great hardships upon Bama people, and particularly women, and during those periods. And when the authorities began to kidnap and round up children. My great-grandmother headed south by foot with the 4 children and walked down to Mossman town, and were camping at a place in Mossman that they called the Junction. Well, it wasn't long after when the authorities moved through. They moved the bummer from the Junction area out further east towards areas around Kuya, what they call Kuya Beach, and campsites around there. They were moved on by authorities for another 3 camping areas until, like my grandmother, my grandfather was forcibly kidnapped and then taken and interned in Yarabah, as was my grandmother. It was it was in fact in Yarabah where both my grandfather and grandmother met, and which leads us into a whole other series of stories of how they met in Yarabah. They eventually married at Yarabah. My grandfather during this period was ferociously writing letters to the so-called protector of Aboriginal during those times, seeking both his and his new wife's release from Yarabah. I have a mountain of letters back and forth from my grandfather to the various departments, and from various departments back to my grandfather. But as I said before, it was my uncle, my eldest uncle Lenny, was born in Yarabah in 1910, and my grandfather was first released from Yarabah, but the release of my grandmother was denied for some time, and of course that took continued writing and by my grandfather to seek the release of my grandmother so they could be together, with their young son, and try and begin a life together with their young son. After working around the traps and saving and where they could, and hard work too. My grandfather was a very hard worker, and he was a very hard worker into his late 80s and 90s. And they eventually, on their release, ended up at a place called Bri in Mossman. And it was at Bri where the twins, my Uncle Charlie and my Auntie Myra, were born. And they were born there on the property at Bri with the help of a Chinese herbalist. You have to keep in mind during those days, that period, it's pretty much horse and cart. So assistance was always slow in coming. Look, I want to thank for those people that have patiently been with us.
There's not, John. Yes, there is. Trish says, John, you mentioned that your father wrote to the authorities. Where did he learn to write?
Yeah, it was my grandfather actually that wrote, and the mission at Yarabah was where they were were schooled, and he actually, his handwriting had a very good penmanship, and he was quite an intelligent man, so he seemed to pick up writing quite easy. But essentially, he learnt that whilst in at Yarabah. Handwriting had a very, very good penmanship.
Thanks, John. Mona was just asking about the visual. Well, I'm sorry that we haven't been able to sort that this week, and we'll give ourselves a task to get that sorted over the week before next week. But we will be here on Sundays at 7 to continue this story. And we were talking. John and I were saying that there's at least 4 good episodes to cover this narrative that has begun here tonight. And of course, it's very personal for John's family, but it wasn't a rare story. But in telling their story, they're telling the stories of many people. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to see if I can recover the video and tidy it up, and or the audio, and post it up on Facebook as well. And hope to see you all next time, next week. And have a good week. Thanks for joining us, and all the best.